Shabbat Shalom. Just this past week, President Trump addressed both houses of Congress as well as the nation. And the very first words out of the president's mouth were condemning the rise of anti-Semitism in our day. Now, of course, it's significant for two reasons. One is that the very first words that the president uttered were condemning anti-Semitism. The second piece is the acknowledgement that while anti-Semitism may not be on the rise, anti-Semitic incidents most definitely are. I'll say that again. Anti-Semitism may not be on the rise. In fact, as I spoke a few weeks ago, the ADL tells us that based on their recent survey, only about 14% of America holds anti-Semitic feelings. It's only about 35 million Americans. But anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise. And I'm grateful to Heidi Budai of the ADL for providing me with this information. And while we're going to speak of the ADL a little bit this morning, and I'm saying welcomes back, I want to welcome back Betsy Kelman, former director of ADL Michigan. It's good to have you back with us, Betsy. Feeling good. So here is from the ADL. As of March 1st, the total bomb threats against JCCs, day schools such as our own. Pardon me, this is just JCCs. 122 bomb threats in 36 states and one Canadian province. 122 bomb threats. The total number of Jewish day schools that received threats, 12. 12 day schools have received such threats, including, of course, our own Hillel Day School. My children can talk about what it means to have someone call in and threaten their lives. That's anti-Semitism. 2 ADL offices have received bomb threats. And now just locally, here in the Metro Detroit area, a Jewish student was told on the bus, "Kill the Jews." Another Jewish student told on a bus, "The Jews should go back to Auschwitz." And another student heard these words, "We're heating up the ovens." Swastikas have been carved into desks or other school equipment at 4 separate schools. Swastikas have been spray painted in bathrooms of schools that have no Jewish students. And one Jewish teenage girl shopping at Meijer just before Christmas was told, "I would wish you a Merry Christmas, but I can tell that you and your friends are a bunch of kikes." While anti-Semitism may not be growing in America, anti-Semitic incidents most definitely are. What do we do with this? 122 JCCs, 12 day schools? What do we do with this? Now, lots of people have pointed to Washington, D.C. and said to our representatives in D.C., "It's your job. You need to speak up more." There are others who pointed to D.C. and said, "Look how good of a job they're doing speaking up." But is that really how we're going to respond to anti-Semitism? Certainly it's important. Certainly our national and local leaders need to condemn anti-Semitism. It is important. But is that it? Is that all you're going to do? Is that all we're going to do? We're going to point to D.C. and say, either, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, to say either thank you or you need to do better? Is that how we're going to respond to anti-Semitism today? To growing anti-Semitic incidents today? This week we read Parshat Truma. And at the very core of this week's Torah portion is the instruction from God to the Jewish people, "Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham." Build for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. In this week's Torah portion, God realizes, and it's a little confused because of the order of portions, but following the golden calf incident, God realizes that our ancestors and we need a central place in which to come together. Not because God dwells in that one particular place, but because we need a place, a room, in which to come in order to truly feel God's presence. Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, build for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. And so it is in this week's Torah portion that our ancestors began bringing gifts of their heart to construct a mishkan, a portable tabernacle in the wilderness, a portable place, a portable sanctuary in which our ancestors could feel connected to God. And so it is that that portable sanctuary marched with them throughout the decades of wandering in the wilderness. They carried it with them into Eretz Yisrael, into the land of Israel, when they came into Israel. But the culmination of the story of that Mikdash really takes place in what is ultimately our Haftarah this morning. It tells us from the book of Kings, chapter 6, and we read it this morning. In the 480th year after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of his reign over Israel, King Solomon began to build the house of the Lord. Now listen to the language as it comes to talk about the construction of the Beit HaMikdash, the construction of that first holy temple in Yerushalayim. It doesn't just say, and so after some time King Solomon built the holy temple. It doesn't even just say in the 4th year of King Solomon's reign. After all, we know King David was not permitted to build the holy temple because he was a man of war. Whereas King Solomon, in his very name, Shlomo, we know is a man of peace, shalom. So it doesn't just say after some time Solomon built the temple. It doesn't just say after 4 years of his reign that King Solomon completed the holy temple. Rather, this chapter in the Bible tells us in the 480th year after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, the culmination of the journey from slavery to freedom was in the construction of that Beit HaMikdash, in the construction of that holy temple. What begins in our Torah portion this week, Parashat Trumah, really comes to a climax in the construction of that beautiful sacred space that existed in Jerusalem. But we know our history. We know what happened next. Because of the sins of Avodah Zarah, of idol worship, of not taking care of our relationship with God, the first temple was destroyed. Ultimately, our people were allowed to return to Israel and build yet a second temple. And that second temple existed for centuries, until roughly the year 70 of the Common Era, when the Romans came in and destroyed it. Now, our rabbis don't come to teach that the first temple or the second temple were destroyed because of the Anti-Semitism. The first temple wasn't just destroyed because of the Babylonians and their hatred for the Jews. The second temple wasn't destroyed by the Romans and their hatred for the Jews. Our rabbis come to teach, as I said, that the first temple was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah, because of idolatry, improper worshiping of God. And the second temple? The second temple was destroyed, our rabbis teach, because not of anti-Semitism, because of sinat chinam, because of senseless hatred from one Jew to another. Because we Jews couldn't get along. We couldn't figure out a path to come together. We could only figure out how to stand on different sides of an aisle. And so following the destruction of the second temple, our people were dispersed for 2,000 years to experience anti-Semitism after anti-Semitism after anti-Semitism in every country in which we lived. This senseless hatred is nothing new to us. But what has kept the Jewish people alive in response to this hatred? What has kept the Jewish people going despite the anti-Semitism? The answer comes from the Talmud, which tells us that after the destruction of the Mikdash, the big sanctuary, there are two places that become the Mikdash Ma'at, the little sanctuaries. The first place, the Jewish home. After the destruction of the Holy Temple, The altar that was on high was replaced by the altar that is our kitchen tables. Think of how much Judaism happens around the kitchen table. That's the Mikdash Ma'at. That's one of our little sanctuaries. And the other sanctuary that helps us following the destruction of the Beit Mikdash to stay alive during 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, the Beit HaKnesset, the house of gathering that you and I call synagogue. The synagogue has been our home to which we turn in response to anti-Semitism, to gain strength, to gain comfort, to gain hope. So here we are again, 2017. And I'll tell you, after more than 2,000 years of exile, nothing much has changed, has it? We're in America, arguably the greatest country in the history of the world, certainly the country that we can experience the greatest freedom. And what do we have? Yet again, anti-Semitism. But as a student of history and as a student of the American Jewish people today, I'll tell you, what scares me the most is not anti-Semitism. After all, the President of the United States, whether you voted for him or not, the President of the United States got up in front of the entire country and condemned anti-Semitism. And just recently, just yesterday, someone accused of 8 of those bomb threats was arrested in Missouri. He was the one, accused anyway, of the bomb threat against Hillel Day School. And there's a little bit of shalom in knowing that he's going to be behind bars. But those are not my biggest fears. These anti-Semitic incidents, frankly, are not what scares me the most about the current climate today. What scares me the most is that for 2,000 years our people turned to the Jewish home and to the synagogue as a place of refuge from anti-Semitism. That's where we came together to find strength and hope. We turned to our Judaism, we turned to our spirituality, we turned to each other, our community, to seek strength. But today so many people have left the synagogue. So many people have chosen not to live Jewish lives in their home. That's what scares me. That's what keeps me up at night. Because those places in which for 2,000 years we have found sanctuary from the anti-Semites of the world are crumbling before us. So here we are, Shabbat Truma, the Torah portion in which we began building that sanctuary, that portable sanctuary in the wilderness, thousands of years ago. And the words of the portion say, "Those who bring gifts of the heart will strengthen the community." Those who bring the gifts of their heart will strengthen the community. And God reminds us, Asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, build for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. Friends, this anti-Semitism is real and it's not going away anytime soon. But it's nothing we haven't seen before. But we are challenged, we are called upon this week and every week to respond to the anti-Semitism, not by pointing to Washington, D.C. and saying, you need to do better, you need to do more, but by looking inward and asking, how can we bring the gifts of our heart and our mind to strengthen synagogue, to strengthen the Jewish home? The answer to the anti-Semitism of today, the response to the anti-Semitism of 2017 is right here among us. And frankly, more importantly perhaps, it's among those who are not sitting with us today. If you want to stand up to anti-Semites, do Jewish. If you want to stand up to anti-Semitism, do Jewish. If you want to respond to the hatred that exists in the world today, come to shul and do Judaism in the home. Because for thousands of years, that has been the only successful response to anti-Semitism, and it will continue to be the only successful response to anti-Semitism today if we will it, if we make it happen. As Moses was standing with the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan River looking into the Promised Land, he said to them, "Your job is not yet complete, but have strength. Be of good courage. Hope in the Lord." This Shabbat of Parashat Trumah, let us stop pointing fingers at the anti-Semites. Let us stop pointing fingers at Washington, D.C. Let us turn inward to ourselves and to each other to begin strengthening the Jewish people from synagogue and from the Jewish home. Because that is and will continue to be the only response to the anti-Semitism that has existed for thousands of years. This Shabbat of Parashat Trumah, let us remember God's words to our ancestors in this week's Torah portion. Asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Construct for me sanctuary, that I may dwell among you. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say together.